Fantastic. Thanks for that introduction. Can everyone hear me and see my screen share? Great. Thanks for the thumbs up, Sendar. All right. It's an honor and a privilege to be here on this occasion with so many educators in the post-secondary sector. And I'm thankful for the opportunity to present to you all today. And I'm here as a representative of Mote Education. And our focus today is on curriculum and what it means to have contextualized curriculum. I've approached this sort of as a general overview, and we're going to explore three questions: what, why, and how. We will have time for a question and answer at the end. If you have questions during the presentation, I encourage you to put them in the chat box. I will monitor the chat box and hopefully be able to address your questions afterwards. Lau, I can see the timer. Please just flag me if for some reason I'm not following it. But it looks like we've got 35 minutes or until, I guess it'd be until 3 p.m. Myanmar time, or for me, 3:30 Thai time. Okay. All right. So while I do this presentation, while I'm speaking, I'd like you to think about what realities you and your institution and the curriculum within have in the short term, so over the next year or so, in the medium term, over the next 3 years, and if you can think about or make a prediction about what the realities might be over the next 5 years, over the long term. And I'd also like you to think about what possibilities exist for you, your institution, your students, the curriculum they're in, over the short term, the medium term, and the long term. The first question I'd like to address today is, what is curriculum? I have worked in curriculum design and development with Mote since 2017. And so in the last 5 years, I've done a lot of work with curriculum, but I've also found that there are occasionally misunderstandings or confusions over what curriculum means and what curriculum is. What you see on the screen in front of you, is this an element of curriculum? What do you see? What information does it contain? Do you think this is an element of curriculum? How about these? What's on the screen in front of you now? What information do they contain? Do you think these are elements of curriculum? What about this? What is this? What does it describe? What is it used for? Is this maybe an element of curriculum? What do you think? And finally, what's on the screen now? What does it present? What does it contain? What does it describe? How is it used? Who uses it? Is this an element of curriculum? This is a little bit of a trick question, because all of these are elements of curriculum. In the bottom right, oops, let me go back. Let's try to put the laser pointer on. I'll use the mouse. In the bottom right, the first slide that I showed were course descriptions, the goals, the objectives, the outcomes of a course. The second slide which is now on the left side of the screen, are examples of course books, textbooks. We have a learning management system, resources. The third slide in the top right was an example of a timetable for a class entitled Applied Mathematics. It's an example of a schedule. This is also a part of curriculum. And finally, in the middle of your screen on the fourth slide, a lot of information is an assessment system. Within an assessment system, you might find rubrics, for example. This is also a part of curriculum. As you can see with all of these elements, curriculum is something that is very large and has a lot of components or elements that interact with one another. I quite like the definitions, plural, provided in Parami's Center for Education Policy Research's 2020 glossary of higher education terminology. If you haven't seen this resource yet, I think it's a very fantastic resource that unpacks a lot of the technical terms used when we discuss education, and in particular, higher education. There is a link. When you access this slideshow as a PDF after the conference, you can follow the link on this slide to access this resource. It's a bilingual resource, and I highly recommend it for anyone who works in education. So they offer 3 definitions of curriculum in this resource. These definitions are quite long, but I've highlighted the key points that I would like to emphasize in blue text. So curriculum typically refers to the knowledge and skills students are expected to learn, which includes many things: the learning standards or learning objectives they are expected to meet, the units and lessons that the teachers teach, the assignments and projects that are given to students, the books, materials, videos, presentations, the readings, the teaching and learning resources that are used in the course. That's also included in curriculum, as well as the tests, the assessments, the other methods used to evaluate student learning are all elements of curriculum. Furthermore, there are 2 other definitions provided, which I also think are highly relevant and relate to the first definition on the last slide. When we think of curriculum, we can think of, in definition number 2, a blend, an interaction of educational strategies, course content, learning outcomes, educational experiences, assessment, the educational environment, and the individual student's learning style, a personal timetable, and a program of work. That's a long list of things that are in our blend for curriculum. So curriculum entails thinking about a lot of different elements, a lot of different aspects of education. And if we look at definition number 3, we can see that curriculum is designed to achieve educational objectives. It includes learning outcomes, content, instructional methods, and evaluation. So I hope by looking at these 3 definitions, you can see there are a lot of similarities. There are a lot of overlaps in listing the many different elements that combined, that blend, that interact to form curriculum. So just to simplify this a bit, curriculum describes what will happen and how it will happen. It's systematic. It's also iterative, which means it can be developed. It can change over time. Curriculum may be designed and developed in many various ways. I would argue that there's no one way that we always design and develop curriculum. It's a very personal experience for educators. And I think it's very rewarding and creative experience. And we can see that curriculum includes many elements. It includes the educational environment, the profiles of the learners, the learning objectives, the content that is taught, the teaching and resources and learning resources that are used, the timetables, the schedules, the syllabi that are followed, the pedagogy, the teaching methods, the activities, the lessons that are used by teachers. And finally, the assessment that is used to find out to what extent students are learning. Pardon me. So why do we need curriculum? Why is it important to design curriculum? Well, I think curriculum offers a roadmap so that teachers know where they are going during the educational experience. And learners know where they're going during the educational experience. And curriculum is a way to explain education. And what I mean by this is that we can use curriculum to present what education means to us and what the educational experience means to us, whether we're teachers and educators, educational planners, school administrators, principals, managers. For those of us that are involved in education, care very much, very passionately for education, creating curriculum, designing curriculum, and using curriculum is a way to explain what education means to us, what values it has, what purposes it has. And this is very useful so that stakeholders know what to expect from graduates of an educational program, and also from those others that are involved in educational programs, such as teachers, managers. So I think curriculum is a really important thing to dedicate time and effort to considering. So what informs curriculum design and development? I'm sort of simplifying this for the sake of this presentation, but I think we can think of it as there are three types of expertise that work together to create curriculum. And these expertises, these types of expertise, they don't all need to come from the same source. I think designing curriculum is very collaborative, and oftentimes this expertise is coming from different sources, different people who are working together to create the curriculum. So those three types of expertise relate to pedagogy, so effective teaching and learning. They relate to content, subject-specific skills and knowledge, and they relate to context. And I think it's really useful to think these, to keep these three types of expertise in mind when you begin to plan the process of designing and developing curriculum. So you can identify what expertise do you have, what expertise do other people around you have that you can collaborate with to create the curriculum. The second question I'd like to address this afternoon: why is contextualized curriculum advantageous? Why should we contextualize curriculum? Well, here are some reasons from a very brief literature review I did that really spoke to me. And I highlighted, I guess, the main takeaways in blue, which I'll read aloud. So Fernandez et al. Write that contextualizing curriculum, it improves the odds, it improves the chances of the curriculum being meaningful to students and useful in everyday life. And sort of in a nutshell, that's kind of the purpose of education, right? I mean, you want education to be meaningful for the students so that they, or the learners, so that they can then take what they've learned and use it in everyday life to improve the world around them. Another benefit of contextualized education, according to Gillespie, is that it helps the learner understand not only the facts, but also the big picture. It helps the learner understand not only the facts, but also the big picture. It helps to fit everything together so that it's more meaningful for them. And finally, at the bottom, according to Yamuchi, students become motivated when the curriculum is contextualized because what they are learning is more meaningful and relevant to their lives outside of school. Motivation, of course, as we know as educators, is extremely important. And ensuring that students are motivated to put in the effort required to learn, to acquire, to develop, to practice, to master new skills, and to use and understand and critique new knowledge. Motivation is key for those things. Contextualized curriculum can help motivate students. So let's explore a little bit more about what contextualized curriculum is. Well, I think there are 4 aspects to contextualized curriculum. Those are listed in the left-hand side of the chart in front of you. The first aspect relates to place. That is, developing connections between the curriculum and situations that are familiar to learners. The curriculum in real life, making sure that the curriculum, all of those things we looked at in the first section of my presentation, relate to the lives of the students and the world around them. Situating what the students are learning to their daily lives. The second aspect relates to the learners themselves. Ensuring that there are connections between the curriculum and the learner's interests and characteristics. This will better situate the curriculum within the needs and also the expectations of the learners. So we have contextualizing for place, contextualizing for the learners. Then we have contextualizing for pedagogy, which is kind of like contextualizing for the teachers. So allowing the curriculum to be used with different teaching methods, or as I've written here, diverse teaching methods and diverse learning experiences. So making sure that the curriculum is able to include different ways of teaching, different ways of learning related to the pedagogy used by the teachers themselves. And then finally, the last aspect that I'd like to highlight relates to the content. So this means adapting the curriculum so that what is taught and learned, the subject content, the knowledge and the skills, is meaningful, interesting, and useful to the learners. So I think it's useful to think about contextualized curriculum in 4 different ways or 4 different aspects. And I think it's important to think about all 4 of these aspects. When we contextualize curriculum, we want to contextualize it for place, for learner, for pedagogy, and for content. So we want to contextualize it in all 4 of these aspects. So based on place, curriculum that is close to the learner's lived and experienced realities, for example, their daily lives. So you might make sure that the subject content can be related to real life situations. This increases the learner's awareness and understanding of real world issues, for example. The second bullet point on this slide is something that's I'm quite passionate about, and it involves the inclusion of local knowledge, or we might even think of this as plural. Local knowledge is related to social knowledge, cultural knowledge, political knowledge, economic knowledge, environmental knowledge, etc. So thinking about the local level elements within the parentheses here, and also including local issues, local needs, local concerns, and also local aspirations, local dreams, local hopes, local goals. I think it's really useful for curriculum to reflect these elements, which sometimes you might hear called localization, which is a term that gets used a lot. I do think that localization is very useful when it comes to contextualizing curriculum. And that's why it's important to have people contributing to curriculum design who have that local knowledge, that local awareness, that local expertise related to the context expertise. Aspect number 2, based on the learner, so that the curriculum, making sure that curriculum is meaningful, significant, interesting, understandable to learners. Ways to do this include connections with the experiences, the backgrounds, the identities, the characteristics of learners, building upon their interests, their needs. These might be cognitive needs, these might be affective needs, social needs, or physical needs, building upon their prior knowledge, and building upon their expectations. So in a way, we want our curriculum to be designed in a student-focused manner, or in a learner-focused manner, or learner-centered. And we can do this, if you look at the bullet point at the bottom, we can do this by engaging with learners during curriculum design and development. For example, we can use things like learner profiles. We might ask for feedback if we iterate our curriculum over time. I'll talk a little bit more about this at the end of the presentation. Aspect number 3, based on pedagogy. So curriculum that includes teaching methods, techniques, strategies that promote learning, establish positive learning environments, address the needs of the learner, and meet the expectations of stakeholders. So quite a lot to think about when it comes to pedagogy. But what we can do, we can allow, teachers the flexibility in pedagogical approaches, and also encourage a diversity of approaches. We can use different teaching methods, and we can also include a variety of learning experiences. And we want to orient the curriculum to the learner's development in terms of the relevant knowledge and skill acquisition. And this kind of relates to the objectives that we set in our curriculum. What do we want the students to be able to do after they've gone through the curriculum? What should they be able to do? Aspect number 4, content. Curriculum that highlights and emphasizes subject content that is useful and relevant for the learner's lives outside of school. So as curriculum designers, we can select content that is meaningful for learners and the lives they lead. And this requires, again, knowing who your learners are and what their lives may be like. I think it's quite important to emphasize a focus on the real world application of skills and knowledge. What the students are learning in the classroom should be able to be applied to life outside the classroom. And you can do this by considering the linkages between subject content and practical experiences, such as community projects. And I know that there are other presenters in this conference who are talking a lot about community projects. And so that might be some interesting food for thought. So to wrap up this section, I mean, what does it mean to contextualize curriculum? Another nice definition that I know, I'll just highlight the blue text for now. But contextualizing curriculum can be done by adapting curricular contents, those elements that we looked at earlier in the first section, in order to bring them closer to the student and to the environment where teaching and learning occurs. We want to bring the learning goals. We want to bring the course description, the assessments, the pedagogy closer to the learner and the context around the learner, the environment in which they live. So finally, how might we begin to contextualize curriculum? I'm going to quickly go over just a few things that we have done before at Mote Education and that you might want to use in your own practice or perhaps even with us. So we like to conduct situation analyses. These are also sometimes called environment analyses. I'd like to highlight, if you can see my pointer, that this is plural. This is a plural noun, analyses. So I think that when designing curriculum at the beginning, it's important to not do a single analysis, but to do multiple analyses. And so a situation analysis describes the context, the environment within which teaching and learning take place. And you can see what those characteristics might be in the bullet point list. So thinking about infrastructure, thinking about resources, thinking about the community, thinking about stakeholders, thinking about the situation around the teaching and learning. Here's an example of a situation analysis. This is only part of a situation analysis. The full document would be quite a few pages longer than this. But this is an example that we created, I think years ago. One of my colleagues created this one. So what you can see is sort of a synthesis. So a summary of the resources, the syllabus, the teachers, stakeholders, the community, and the location. So gathering a lot of information about the situation where the education will happen. So it's important to think about the situation through a situation analysis or an environment analysis. It's also important to think about the learner or the learners. And so at Mote, we call these needs analyses. Some might call them, some might use learner profiles. But this is when we seek to describe who the learners are. Thinking about their bio data, as much as possible, thinking about their current proficiencies, so what they're able to do now, thinking about their prior learning in the past, thinking about their interests, thinking about their motivations, thinking about their learning preferences, etc. Also, as much as we can, thinking about their needs, and we can think about what their cognitive needs may be, their social needs, their affective needs, and their physical needs. And also thinking about their expectations. What skills do they want to acquire? What knowledge do they want to acquire on the course? What supports them acquiring this knowledge or these skills? What barriers might exist? What might prevent them from reaching their expectations? Here's an example of a learner profile. If you have lots of learners, you may have many different learner profiles. Sort of the more information you can get, the more you have to think about when it comes to contextualizing your curriculum for your learners. So here's a learner profile. This is fictional. My colleague created this. And so you might think about the attitudes, the environment where the learner studies, where the learner lives, which is especially useful if you are doing distance or remote education. The strengths, the known strengths of the learner, and what constraints might exist. And a learner profile might be something that's difficult to do before you open your course, but during the course, you might be able to develop learner profiles. So we would use these analyses to inform the content of teaching and learning, the expectations of teaching and learning, and the formats of teaching and learning. So for example, related to content, what subjects and topics will we include in our curriculum? What skills and knowledge do we want to focus on? What learning objectives, what might our goals be? What outcomes might we have? What sort of experiences do we want to have during the education? Include these in our curriculum. This might be activities, tasks, projects, field trips. What sort of assessment might we use? And what might our pedagogical approaches be? Do we want to use project-based learning? Do we want to use experiential learning? Do we want to use a lot of varieties of learning? And then we can also think about sort of the practicalities or the format of teaching and learning. So is delivery going to be face-to-face? Is it going to be remote? Will we have a physical classroom, or do we need to use a virtual classroom, a learner management system, for example? What languages will we use for instruction? And again, what experience, what tasks will occur during the education experience, the education that the students receive. So we can use these situation analyses, these needs analyses. We can use the information therein to help us create a curriculum framework. This is what we do at Mote. So we take the information from the situation analyses, we take the information from the needs analyses, we use that to work with, to collaborate with educators to create a curriculum framework. You notice that the curriculum framework is a much larger circle than the other two, because the curriculum framework is a pretty big document with a lot of information. And you can see the list to the right with the horizontal arrows. This is a list of the many, many things that go into the curriculum framework. And these things, these elements, and we looked at a lot of these in the first part of this presentation, decisions about these elements can come from the analysis done during the situation analysis and the needs analysis. Here is just a snapshot of a part of a curriculum framework, just to give you an idea of what it can look like. You have in the top left corner the title of a course. In the right-hand side, you have some of the practical information, a description, objectives, and then down below you have a timetable, right? And you've got a breakdown of the topics, the resources, the assessment that will occur, and what supplementary resources might occur as well. So this is just an example of what part of a curriculum framework can look like. So in summary, I presented 4 aspects of contextualized curriculum, and I think these aspects together can be used to connect the elements of curriculum to the real world. So we use these four aspects to connect these elements of curriculum to the real world. It has many benefits for the learner. And then we can use the situation analyses, we can use needs analyses to help design a curriculum framework. So by thinking about these aspects and how they can be used to create and describe the elements of curriculum, that can lead us to the creation of a curriculum framework. Some very general tips, because I think the creation of all curriculum is different. But some general tips is collaboration is really useful. Collaborate when designing and developing curriculum. That collaboration could include teachers, students, stakeholders. One thing I didn't include here, but I should have, is outside resource persons, outside experts. Iterate the curriculum over time. Curriculum should be dynamic rather than static. So as you use it, get feedback, make changes, review your curriculum, have an annual review and update it. Don't be afraid to update it. Leverage expertise that's available, pedagogy, content, and context. Identify realities and be open to possibilities. So some very general tips, but I hope that this is inspiring. At Mote Education, we have some, we do have some expertise, especially related to pedagogy and content. So we support schools and organizations with curriculum workshops that focus on curriculum design and development. So if you're interested in working with us to design or develop curriculum, please reach out. We typically do 3 to 5 day curriculum workshops. And this could be creating brand new curriculum, or it could be upgrading curriculum that you're already using. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that Mote has produced many different textbooks, particularly for post-secondary education in the Myanmar context. So in Myanmar, but also communities from Myanmar that may not live in Myanmar at the moment. And so these resources, these are course books. In a lot of ways, these resources have been contextualized to Myanmar as a country. So they might lack that localization at the local level, but if we think about contextualization on a national level, at a nation state level, our course books are oftentimes contextualized to that level. So do reach out if you're curious about any of these. And just some things to think about moving forward. What are our realities in the short term? What are the realities at your school in the short term, the medium term, and the long term? How might this affect what you can do with curriculum and contextualizing the curriculum? What possibilities exist? What things might you be able to try in the short term, in the next year, in the next 2 years, in the next 5 years when it comes to contextualizing your curriculum? And finally, how does a contextualized curriculum support sustainable and inclusive administration and management? I'm going to leave you with that question. I see that my time has run out, and I'm happy to take question and answer. So if you'd like to provide an answer to any of the questions on your screen right now, please do. I'm also happy to field any questions you have. I'm happy to go back to slides if there's a need to review. So thank you very much for your attention. And thank you very much, Lau, for the timekeeping. And it's a fantastic question because, Sam, you have mentioned a point that I sort of talked around in a way, is that oftentimes we find textbooks and they're sort of taking ideas from the West, from Europe or from North America, from the quote unquote developed world or the global North or the high income nations, whatever you might want to call it. And these ideas are presented in the books, and then it kind of falls upon the educators to contextualize those ideas to the environment around them. And that's especially true for human rights. I mean, we know that obviously human rights sort of conceived, formally codified by the United Nations. But yes, Peace and Conflict, there are 2 books. Interesting, Sam Lau knows more about them than I do because she works with them a lot. But from my experience, those books can certainly be contextualized quite well to the local context, to the local situation, because they take ideas that are sort of on a higher level, on a more general level, and then on a more abstract level, and then they can be not literally translated, but adapted to the situation that the learners, the facilitator, the community finds themselves in. And I think the same is true for human rights material. And human rights material is in the book Active Citizenship. And I think that can also be contextualized. And I'm actually quite glad that Lau is the facilitator for this room, because maybe she would type in, she works at Mote's Civic Education and Peace Department, and she might be able to share their email address, because they would be quite well positioned to talk with you more about those particular books. Although I'm very much happy to follow up more. And I think Mote as an organization would definitely be willing to discuss more with you, to work with you, to partner, to think about, okay, how can we take peace and conflict material? How can we take human rights material? And how can we make it really relevant for the on the ground, the local situation, the people, the communities, the dynamics there.
Thank you, Greg. Okay, long hair, got a cool deal, we have a sensitive Myanmar, senior peace trainer in it, and we sound any the occupier, a dread, Punanga, peace and civic, broke Tamamaho, peace, sensitive education training in a better bureau, and most of the Java, or long hair, if you first go, be tap out Tama, maybe keep it have I for now.
Also, Himi has a question about the curriculum workshops. So those are by request, Himi, and you can reach out to us to schedule. So we don't do sort of a public workshop. We do a workshop with on request with educators, schools that do it. So it's a very we do that because then it's a very intimate, a very personalized, a very collaborative experience. So if you're interested in doing, in partnering with Mote to do work on contextualizing your curriculum, please send us an email, because we don't do it publicly. So you'll need to send us an email, and we'll as best we can schedule that event. Whether that event has to happen, that workshop has to happen remotely due to the situations around us, or if it can happen face to face. But do reach out. That's the way to get started with this. Is you will need to take that first step, and then we'll have a conversation about where we go from there. So please do send us an email or a Facebook message, and we can go from there. Yes, Sema Ellis, I see your hand is raised.
Yes, thank you, Greg, for sharing. So I would like to know, is there any like circumstance or experience you have, like why designing for contextualized curriculum? Then you have so many things to choose. Like for example, this one is relevant to our content. This one is then like since educational center or institution have limited time to provide the services, then we like overwhelming what topics to choose or to prioritize. And like we always face that one in EMEA. We want to include so many things, but which one to prioritize, something like that. So yeah, how do you usually solve, or is there any circumstance that you manage to help any program to make contextualized curriculum design?
That's such a great question, because yeah, that's such a great question, because there's a lot that, you know, as educators, we want to do as much as we can, and sometimes we want to do more than we can. And we have to make decisions when it comes to what do we teach and how do we teach it? What do we include in our curriculum? What do we exclude? As Sama Ellis said, what do we prioritize? Those are not easy decisions to have. We have this expression in English, sometimes you have to kill your darling. So you have to make difficult decisions like that, because you can't include everything under the sun. I would say there's no one way to make that decision. But for me, I think it's about the values of the educational program that is being provided. So what are the values of the decision makers who are making the decisions about the curriculum? And then I think it also, if we contextualize it, then we might be able to prioritize it according to needs. So what are the most pressing needs for the learners? What are the most pressing needs for the community or for their communities? Because at the post-secondary level, we often have this goal. We want the graduates to be change agents in the community. And so we want them, when they graduate, to be able to go out into their community and contribute to positive change. And so if that's our goal, and I think that that's oftentimes a general goal, and it's a very admirable one, then we can sort of prioritize based on what sort of change do the communities want to occur, and we can sort of work backwards. And so that kind of makes me think that in a way, if we think about what our vision is for education, and as educators, what are we contributing to? What are our graduates contributing to? What is that vision for the future? And then we can kind of work backwards. Okay, if that's the vision we want, if that's the change we want to see, then we work backwards. Okay, then what should our education program be doing so that change can occur? And then we can think about, okay, what skills, what values, what attitudes, what knowledge needs to be conveyed. And then we can sort of prioritize the topics we teach based on that. But it is a difficult decision. But I think at the same time, it's a very interesting discussion to have. It's a very beneficial negotiation to make, because ultimately you want your education to be as meaningful as possible. And that really depends on knowing the context that the education is occurring in. I see Lau's making a T, but those are some of my thoughts. But Sibalis, you raised like an excellent point. And it's something that we all need to think about as educators, is how do we make those decisions? What informs our decision making? What values influence the decisions we make as educators? And at Mote, we work with educators and educational planners to help them think about those values, those aims, those objectives. And that's why it's really useful to have workshops. So again, please contact Mote if you're interested in doing workshops. I'm going to go to the last slide just so we can end with our contact information. Maybe take a screenshot of this. And there's a question in the chat from Daniel about reflecting the current situation in the curriculum. And yeah, I think that's really hard. There are a lot of sensitivity issues at the moment, and I don't know if anyone knows exactly what sort of the best approaches to those are. But that's definitely, when we think about realities, the reality has changed over the last what has it been? Over the last 15 months. So we need to be mindful of our realities and what sensitivities there are, what risks there are when it comes to providing education in this climate. But that's also an excellent question. Thanks, Lau.